Hello, good people. Welcome back to the Kuhb Games YouTube channel. We're going to be finishing up our top 10 series here, going over the top 10 most underplayed traps in GOAT format. So we already did the monsters video as well as the spells video. So if you haven't seen those already, go ahead and check them out if you want to. But I like to play with a lot of different traps, and I think there are so many different traps that are stronger than what people give them credit for in this format. This list, I had to narrow down from a pretty long list of options. This was actually harder for me to do than the monsters or the spells video. So if you think I left anything off, or if you think anything is incorrect, as always, please let me know down in the comments. But we are going to start off with some honorable mentions here. We have Ultimate Offering, Curse of Royal, and Desert Sunlight. All of these cards, pretty good. Probably could have made the list of 10, but I decided to leave them in as honorable mentions. And without further ado, let's get started on our list with number 10. We have Mind Crush. So this is a card that obviously saw more play later on in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whenever the searchers, tutors, whatever you want to call them, started to ramp up and play a little bit. GOAT format does have some of these. Obviously, you know, we have Thunder Dragon that searches out Thunder Dragon. We have Rhoda, we have Sangan, stuff like that. You can even use Mind Crush to take out cards that your opponent got off of Magician of Faith, or they sent back to their hand with a Night Assailant, something like that. Obviously, you don't want to Mind Crush 2 Night Assailants if that's what your opponent has, but, you know, it's something that you can do that, I guess. I have actually seen some high-level players play around with this card, specifically in Turbo. You can play it with 3 copies of Trap Dust Shoot, of course, and once you know your opponent's hand, Mind Crush can always just take cards from it. I've seen people try to get a leg up on the competition in the mirror match, maybe against Warriors as well, by playing Mind Crush in those decks. And that's what kind of made me think, you know, maybe this card has something to it if even the top level players are, you know, experimenting around with it a little bit. But also, maybe since it didn't really catch on, maybe those top level players found out that maybe this card isn't it. Maybe it's not as powerful. Maybe it really shouldn't be played. So maybe that's why we're not seeing it in the format at all. But I do think that Mind Crush does have some potential and could probably be seen a little bit more in the format and probably deserves a spot on this list at number 10. Coming in at number 9, we've got Needle Sealing. This card, I believe, is a lot more powerful than people give it credit for, but I do believe it is a little bit meta-dependent. Needle Sealing is not going to be good against Turbo, so if Turbo's running, you know, 30-35% of the meta, Needle Sealing's probably not what you need. But, you know, for a localized meta, maybe you're playing against a lot of Warriors, you're playing against a lot of Control, a lot of Burn, something like that, Needle Sealing's a totally fine option. Say you're playing Pac-Man or even like Turbo, something like that, where you're setting a lot of monsters, Needle Sealing isn't going to destroy your own stuff. It's going to be a one-sided board wipe, and that, you know, is very good, especially since it's a reactive board wipe. It's not something you have to play on your turn like Lightning Vortex. Needle Sealing can be activated on your opponent's turn, like while they're trying to OTK you. Say, the Reasoning Gate, your opponent summons out a bunch of monsters that aren't Jinzo, well, flip Needle Sealing. Cool. You got rid of the board. It's kind of the reason that like Needle Sealing was used as a tech against windups back in the day. Opponent summons out a big board, flip Needle Sealing. Problem solved. It's really good at taking out the GOAT tokens. It gets rid of Thousand Eyes Restrict if there are more monsters on the board. It's really good at getting rid of Ojama tokens, stuff like that. Needle Sealing, I think, is just, you know, baseline has a very powerful effect, and some decks can manipulate it to be even more powerful and one-sided, so it's not symmetrical. The reason that we don't see it, and like this card has been seen throughout Go format for a little bit here and there, but yeah, the reason we don't see it is, you know, obviously it does take a little bit of setup. There have to be 4 monsters on the battlefield. It does destroy all face-up monsters, so it can't hit your monsters. And also, like I said, it is a little bit meta-dependent. If everybody's going to be setting monsters, nobody's summoning a whole lot of monsters or summoning things face-up, then Needle Sealing is, you know, just naturally not going to be as good. So I understand why it's not played too much in the format now, but I do think it could be some sort of side deck tech that you could bring in against like Control, Burn, RGT, and the likes, and does have applications against the aggro decks. Obviously, like Warriors doesn't summon out a whole lot of monsters at once sometimes because they do play a very small monster count, but stuff like Earth aggro, something like that, they do play a higher monster count, and they do want to swarm the board a little bit. So Needle Sealing has applications there too, though not the strongest in the aggro matchups. But yeah, I do think Needle Sealing could potentially be seeing a little bit more play, probably just in side decks. Next up at number 8, we've got Compulsory Evacuation Device. This card almost specifically for side decks again, just like Needle Sealing. This card is very targeted against decks that are playing Thousand Eyes Restrict, almost entirely. Though it does have value against some other decks. We do actually see Reasoning Gate citing this sometimes, especially Machine Gate. Decks that hate Spell Canceller, decks that hate King Tiger Wanghu. Compulse can just, be a sort of catch-all answer, get that off the board, and then you can do your powerful thing, and you don't have to do it in response to the monster being summoned. The monster can sit there for a little bit, you draw this, and then you can just kind of flip it up anytime and deal with the problem. Compulse, obviously not as strong in Go format because we don't have Synchros, we don't have Xyz monsters, but we do still have the fusions. Like I mentioned, Thousand Eyes Restrict, it's a clean 1-for-1 answer to Thousand Eyes Restrict, and this card does see play from time to time inside decks. You see it as sometimes like a 1-of, 2-of in Warriors. Occasionally, like I said, we're seeing it in the Reasoning Gate decks from time to time, but I do believe that if we see more of a resurgence in Goat control, Chaos control, something like that, which we tend to do around Worlds time, a lot of like really top players in Worlds just love to play the control decks, so you see a little bit of a resurgence in that deck. Compulsory Evacuation Device, I think, definitely is a side deck option that could be played quite a bit more whenever the meta is adjusted for it being valuable. Number 7, we have Bottomless Trap Hole, another reactive removal card. I tried this out in Warriors from time to time. I played it in the main, I played it in the side, I played it, 1, 2-of, and obviously a lot of other people have played around with this in Warriors as well. A lot of people hate this card and they will never play it. I actually liked it. So I think this card deserves not maybe like a high spot on this list, but kind of bottom half where it is. It is totally fine. Especially if you have a meta where your opponent is playing, your opponents are playing a lot of Warriors, Earth aggro, even RGT, stuff like that. Bottomless Trap Hole is totally fine against those decks, but it also does have applications against the Chaos decks. If you are playing an aggro deck, your opponent's probably siding in multiple copies of Zombra the Dark. Well, you can deal with that with Bottomless Trap Hole. You can deal with Breaker cleanly, much better than, of course, a Battle Trap would. Sakuretsu's just getting destroyed by that Breaker, and it's out of here. Whereas Bottomless takes care of the Breaker on site and gets rid of it cleanly. The other good thing that I like about Bottomless Trap Hole is it can take out Chaos monsters and just banish them. Get them out of here. If your opponent's playing Prima, Call of the Haunted, they're not getting those cards back. They are just gone. And Bottomless Trap Hole is very good about that. A lot of times against Earth aggro, Warriors, or whatever, you Sakuretsu their monster, they just call it right back. They Prima it right back. If they're spicy, they get it back with the Warrior returning alive. Something like that. Bottomless Trap Hole prevents all that. It just gets the monster gone. Obviously, there's a reason that this card isn't played in a very high volume, even though it does all of those things. It's because a lot of the best monsters in the format are small monsters that are going to get under Bottomless Trap Hole, so it's not going to be able to affect them. Your flip effect monsters, Tsukuyomi, Gravekeeper Spy is a big one, stuff like that. They're all going to get under Bottomless Trap Hole, so it doesn't hit everything. It is a little bit of a narrow card, but it is a card that I like, and I think a card that could be tried out a little bit more and played, especially if the meta moves a little bit more towards some more aggression, which I think definitely could happen. So these bottom 4 cards, well, I guess except for Mind Crush, are all kind of meta dependent a little bit. And I think we're going to move a little bit away from that with the rest of the cards on our list here. Up at number 6, we've got Last Turn. And this is more so sort of like whenever I put Library on the monsters list. Last Turn is on here a lot because the deck Last Turn itself isn't played as much as I think it could. And therefore, I think that this card is underrepresented because of that. Last Turn has had a lot of innovators work on it sort of recently. Gulaz has worked on it. The Heslop brothers have worked on it. Easy to Slay You, I believe, was working on it for a little bit, but a few people have jumped in and tried to work on the deck. I was going to do that, but I just got caught up with other things. I haven't worked on Last Turn as much as I want to, but I believe the Last Turn deck is actually pretty close. It has a really good Chaos Turbo matchup, and I think it's a deck that's just poised to do some good work and show up a little bit more in the meta other than being just like a trash tier deck. I think once people really figure out how to build it, how to play it, because it is a difficult deck to play, that this deck could absolutely show up a lot more, and then we're going to be seeing this card specifically a lot more. It's a shame that it's at 2. If the card was at 3, I feel like obviously the deck would be a lot more consistent. Your main combo piece being semi-limited is not great for your consistency, even though, you know, you do still get to play 2 full copies of it. A third would be very nice. But yeah, I think just because the last turn deck could be a lot more powerful, could be a lot more played, I decided that we could include this card on this list because by extension, the card itself isn't played as much as I think it could in GOAT format. Starting out the top half of our list, we have Divine Wrath. This is a card that I just kind of started thinking about one day. Just kind of randomly. I was like, you know, people play all of these discard traps already. We have Raigeki Break, Phoenix Wing Wind Blast. Sometimes you see Lightning Vortex, Monster Reincarnation running around a little bit. Have people just forgotten about Divine Wrath? This card's really good. Actually, like, you kind of think it's like a little bit narrow, and it is whenever you compare it to Raigeki Break, because like Break takes care of the problem, but Divine Wrath can stop a lot of the monsters who could just activate their priority effects under Raigeki Break. Like, your opponent summons a BLS, Divine Wrath, it's gone. Even on the attack activation, that's still an activated effect. It gets rid of that. It gets rid of Mystic Swordsman level 2 as well. It just, you know, there are a lot of activated effects. All of the flip effect monsters get Spy out of here, just completely gone. You don't have to activate the Raigeki Break or the Phoenix Wing Wind Blast preemptively and hope you don't hit a Sinister Serpent or a Sangan. You can just wait for the effect activation, Divine Wrath it if you feel like you need to at that point, and get the monster gone. Now, obviously, it is fighting for a spot with Raigeki Break, and I do feel like Raigeki Break is a better card. And Raigeki Break, of course, can deal with other threats like spells and traps, so it's not just dealing with monsters like Divine Wrath. But I think there are a lot of times where Divine Wrath is just really good and can pull you ahead in a game. I've done quite a bit of testing with the card. I do think it is powerful, and I think the only reason that we're not seeing this is because it is fighting with other discard traps, and people just don't really give this card the time of day to properly test it and see if maybe this card could work alongside the discard traps that we're already playing. But I do think Divine Wrath is quite underplayed because it's not played at all in GOAT format. I think if you are looking for a tech choice for your deck and you can support discard traps or any just discard cards in any way and support those pretty well, I think Divine Wrath is an option that you should definitely look into. Coming up at number 4, we have a limited card. We have Deck Devastation Virus. I fully believe the reason that this card is not played really that much at all is because it is limited. If this card was at 2 or 3, I think it would be played a lot more because I think the issue with it is consistency. However, if you get this effect off early, sometimes even late, it could just be game ending. I think this is one of just the straight up most powerful traps that this format has. And honestly, one of the most powerful just effects in general that the format has. This card, if you use it early, just like summon a Zombra, set Deck Devastation Virus, tribute it off, a lot of times your opponent's just going to lose the game unless they're playing like Earth Aggro or something like that. And even then, like, it does hit some cards from Earth, it hits some cards from Warrior. Like, I'm not saying it's good there and that's like makes this card really good, but it does hit. It's not completely dead. So if you play it a game 1 and you're playing against Warrior or Earth, it's not the end of the world, I guess. But that also means you have Zombra in your main, so it's you know, a give and a take there, I guess. But yeah, you're not playing this for the aggro decks, of course. You're gonna play it for stuff that's playing a lot of low-level monsters or a lot of low attack monsters. And Deck Devastation Virus just cleans them all up. It gives you perfect information of what your opponent has, and you get to see their next 3 draws. So you're gaining an immense amount of information, you're destroying a ton of cards, and a lot of times, like, you're just ending your opponent's entire game. You flip this against a control deck, they probably just lose on the spot. Deck Devastation Virus is an incredibly powerful card, only held back by the consistency of you're not guaranteed to see this early because it's at 1. And a lot of people point to that, but you can sort of circumvent the consistency issue a little bit, where if you draw it late, you do have, you know, Graceful Charity in your deck, probably. You have Tribe Infecting Virus. Maybe you're playing some discard traps or whatever. If it does come up late and it is a dead card, you know, just build your deck in a way where you can, you know, you can just get it out of there for some sort of value. And, you know, you can just make sure that you have a lot of good options to use with it. Like you've got Zombra of the Dark, you have Chaos Sorcerer. I do think it was funny in the Warrior channel of the Goat Format Discord, Ivan said that Snatch Steal Chaos Sorcerer is a way to utilize it. But like, yeah, if you're playing Zombra, you've got Rhoda that you can surge it with. You just got a whole bunch of options. It's really just getting the deck Devastation virus to your hand. And I think just the power of the effect is good enough for me to take the consistency issue and say, okay, if the meta is right for this, I'm just going to put it in my deck. If it comes up early, cool, I win the game. And if it doesn't, cool, well, we'll figure that out later. It's not really like taking up a huge spot in your deck. You can kind of work it into decks that are already playing Rhoda. You can just kind of work in a Zombra naturally anyway, something like that. But yeah, I think deck Devastation virus just having such a very powerful effect in this format makes it so this card should probably see some amount of play. At number 3, we've got Ceasefire. I wanted to put this higher up on the list, but some people are figuring out that Ceasefire is actually a good card. This card was played a long time ago in Go format. A lot of times you would see it inside decks, mostly for time concerns. And then people got away from it. They're like, well, it's just a minus. It doesn't actually do anything. Just don't go to time. Play at a reasonable pace, and you won't really have to worry about this card, or, you know, use other things like Mystic Walk became a lot more prevalent and stuff like that. And so people were just like, we just don't need this Ceasefire card anymore, whatever. People kind of laughed at it for being limited, but Ceasefire is actually a really good card. I think it can protect your face down monsters from knock if you really need to do that. It can stop your opponent's flip effects. So it can work as a little bit of like a delayed knock if you really want to or need to, something like that. Gravekeeper's Spy is running around everywhere, so you really want to stop that from being flipped. Or if your opponent flips it and you're wanting damage from the Ceasefire, Gravekeeper's Spy actually makes Ceasefire better because your opponent puts an extra 500 damage on the board for it. Ceasefire just can put up, 1,500, 2,000 points of damage out of nowhere and just take a lot of games. Sometimes that last little bit of chip, especially with Ring of Destruction and BLS in the format, is very valuable. Ceasefire has proven, at least to me, to be a much better card than people give it credit for. And, some people are starting to catch on. They're playing it in the main of Warriors. Some people I've seen playing it in the main of Chaos Turbo. Some people are just siding it to bring in against Turbo, stuff like that. But yeah, Ceasefire, even though we can only play one copy, I think is actually a card that, especially if you're going to be some sort of aggressive strategy where you want to push through a bunch of damage and you want to punish your opponent's flip effect monsters, I think Ceasefire is absolutely a tech that you should look into, and this card should absolutely be seeing more play in Go format. Again, I would have put this higher, but some people have already started to trickle it into their deck lists, so wanted to give it a spot at 3rd, and I think that's totally fair. Up next at number 2, we have Return from the Different Dimension. This card, alongside Deck Devastation Virus, obviously one of the best effects in the game. It's just very, very powerful. Pay half your life points, so it's always on. Unlike Dimension Fusion, which makes you have to pay an exact amount of 2,000. If you're under 2,000, you can't activate Dimension Fusion. Return, you can activate anytime. Also, with Return, your opponent doesn't get to special summon anything. You get to special summon all of the monsters. And with it being a trap card, you can activate it in the battle phase. Return is just a very powerful card that often leads to OTKs, just sometimes just out of nowhere. You can often, protect your monsters in certain ways, like people play Jar of Greed, Dust Tornado stuff. Even Ceasefire, just like flip that up as Chainlink 1, Return is Chainlink 2. Now your opponent can't even like torrential the monsters in response. You can do that with Dimension Fusion as well. That is something that you actually can't do with Dimension Fusion because it is a normal spell. It's not a quick play. So Return has a little bit of built-in protection for your monsters if you do it the right way, which is really nice. And the card just can put so much amount of damage on the board. I know I talked about it whenever we talked about Cannon Soldier in the monster video, because Return can just bring back the Cannon Soldier, bring back a bunch of monsters. If you don't have enough on the board already to kill, the Cannon Soldier can just sweep up and deal in another immense amount of damage. And I also mentioned Ceasefire. Couple this with Ceasefire, your opponent's probably just dead. Let's be real, you're already an aggressive deck if you're playing Return from the Different Dimension, usually. And even like just apart from dedicated Return decks, Return is very good, I think, in some of the aggressive strategies. I've played it in Earth aggro a lot. You can play Gigantes to get your monsters out of there. You're already playing DD Assailant. and DD Warrior Lady. So like you already have built-in synergies with this card, and you're already looking to put a ton of damage on the board anyway. So it just kind of works out. Like you go through the natural progression of the game. Some of your monsters are getting banished due to like summoning the Gigantes, the Rock Spirit, or just with DD Assailant or DD Warrior Lady banishing themselves. Then you just return them all back. And it's just, you know, Earth Monsters Part 2, the sequel. But yeah, Return, just an incredibly powerful effect. Don't want to just keep restating, you know, what it does over and over. So yeah, Return, I think, definitely one of the most underplayed cards in the format, especially since we're not seeing a whole lot of dedicated Return decks running around. You do see one top every now and then, but it's definitely a card that could be played more, not just in the dedicated deck that I don't think is seeing enough play, but also in some other decks such as Earth Aggro and some other aggressive strategies. And coming in at number 1 on our list, we have Skill Drain. This is one of my favorite cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I've done a little bit of talking with some of the people who do like to play this card, and a lot of us believe Skill Drain is actually potentially the most powerful card that sees no play. This card locks down a lot. It is very good against the control strategies. It's very good against Chaos Turbo. And if you're protecting it, a lot of times it can just be lights out in those matchups, especially if you are putting some aggression behind it, like Goblin Attack Force, even Toon Goblin Attack Force, even just, you know, in Earth Aggro where you've got a bunch of big beaters and stuff like that. Skill Drain can absolutely just destroy your opponent's game, while also benefiting your game by, like, you know, making your Goblin Attack Forces not go to defense. So not only is it just like not hurting you really, it's also benefiting you while destroying your opponent's entire game plan. I do think that we could see this card a lot more in some of the aggressive decks, and I also think that we could see it in more lockdown decks. We don't see a whole lot of those running around, but like talking about last turn, talking about the Gulaz style of lockdown burn decks, I think Skill Drain is definitely a card that could be seen more in those decks that aren't seeing a whole lot of play, and also in the aggressive style decks alike. So I think Skill Drain is not just a card that's going to be a one-trick pony in just a Skill Drain deck, or just the lockdown burn decks, or just the aggressive decks. I think it could be utilized in multiple different ways across decks, and I think overall this card is just way too powerful to not be seeing any play in the format. I think this card is incredibly underexplored and should absolutely be utilized more than it is right now, which is almost not at all. So that's going to be the list of the top 10 most underplayed traps in GOAT format. Once again, if you think I got anything wrong or you think I left anything off the list, let me know down in the comments. That's going to be the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. As always, we'll be back with the next one.